When you look at the city map from above, you see a tiny green dot surrounded by gray concrete towers. That dot isn't a park. It's 150 years of one man's refusal to surrender. Deacon Ezekiel Jones was 76 years old in the summer of 2024, and his hands carried the evidence of a lifetime spent in soil, weathered, darkened, with joints that looked like tree roots. His house, a wooden farmhouse built in 1889 by his great-grandfather, sat on exactly 2 acres in what was now Atlanta's most expensive real estate corridor, the Old Fourth Ward. Around him, 40-story glass towers reflected sunlight like mirrors, their shadows falling across his porch like the hands of a closing trap. Every morning, Deacon sat on that porch drinking coffee from the same chipped mug his father had used, watching the city that had grown up around his family's land like weeds overtaking a garden. The neighborhood where he'd been born, where black families had lived since Reconstruction, had transformed almost overnight into luxury lofts and artisan coffee shops with price tags that told the original residents they weren't welcome anymore. On a Tuesday in early June, a sleek black limousine pulled up to his front gate, the kind of vehicle that had no business on a dirt road. A young white man emerged, mid-30s, wearing a suit that probably cost $3,000. He carried a leather briefcase and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His name was Devin Sterling, and he was what Titan Development Corporation called a problem solver. Sterling approached the porch with rehearsed confidence. "Mr. Jones, I'm here to make your life a lot easier." Deacon didn't look up from his coffee. "My life's already pretty easy. Sir, I'm prepared to offer you $2 million for this property. That's triple the assessed value. You could buy a beautiful home in Florida, live like a king, and never worry about maintenance on this." He glanced at the peeling paint on the house, aging structure. Deacon set down his mug slowly. He walked to the edge of his porch and bent down, scooping up a handful of dark soil from the flower bed his late wife Ruth had planted 40 years ago. He held it in his weathered palm, squeezing it gently. "You know what's in this soil, son?" Sterling's smile faltered. Organic matter?" "Blood," Deacon said quietly. "My great-great-grandfather Jeremiah was a slave. Right here, on this land, he was whipped for learning to read. The reason this dirt's so dark? That's why. You're offering me paper money for blood. My answer is no." Sterling's professional demeanor cracked slightly. He opened his briefcase. "Mr. Jones, I understand the emotional attachment, but be realistic. Look around you. This neighborhood has moved on. You're surrounded. The Skyline Plaza development needs this parcel to complete their project. One way or another, this land will be developed." "One way or another?" Deacon's voice was calm, but had an edge like steel. "That sounds like a threat. It's reality." Sterling closed his briefcase with a sharp snap. "Fine, Mr. Jones. You've chosen the hard way. See you in court." What happened next would teach Deacon exactly how hard that way could be. Heir property. Critical information. Number 1. Many black families in the South own land through what's called heir property, land passed down through generations without formal wills or clear titles. The original deed might be in a grandparent's name who died 50 years ago, leaving the property technically owned by dozens of descendants. This creates a dangerous vulnerability. If developers can convince just one heir to sell their fractional share, they can file a partition lawsuit forcing the entire property to be sold at auction. Deacon knew this danger existed, but had never imagined someone would exploit it. Within a week, The harassment began. Construction on the surrounding towers, which had been quiet at night, suddenly started at 5 a.m. with heavy machinery positioned directly against Deacon's property line. Jackhammers, cement mixers, the kind of noise that rattles windows and makes sleep impossible. Delivery trucks deliberately used his dirt road, churning up dust clouds that coated his porch, his garden, everything. When he'd sweep it off, more would come. Then came the drones, small camera-equipped aircraft hovering over his house at all hours, allegedly for property surveys, but obviously meant to invade his privacy and make him feel watched. His neighbors, the few who remained, started avoiding him. They'd already sold their properties and were renting month to month while waiting for their closing dates. One of them, Mrs. Patterson, stopped by to say goodbye. "Deacon, why are you being so stubborn? Take the money. We all did. You can't fight them." "I'm not being stubborn, Caroline. I'm being faithful to my ancestors, to my children. If I sell this land, I'm saying their lives didn't matter." But the pressure was crushing. Deacon's blood pressure spiked. He started having trouble sleeping, not just from the noise, but from the anxiety. He was 76 years old, living alone since Ruth passed, and he was tired. His grandson, Malik, came to visit that weekend. At 25, Malik was in his third year at Emory Law School, and he'd brought bad news. "Grandpa, I need to show you something." Malik spread papers across the kitchen table. "Titan Development filed a lawsuit against you. They found your second cousin Robert, the one who moved to Detroit 30 years ago." Deacon's heart sank. "Robert?" "They bought his heir share. He owned 1/16 of this property through your grandmother's will, or technically, the lack of a will. They paid him $10,000 for his share. Now, they're filing a partition action to force the sale of the entire property. Heir property, critical warning number 2. Partition lawsuits are devastating. When multiple heirs own fractional shares of property and can't agree, any heir, including one who just bought in, can petition the court to either physically divide the land, impossible for most properties, or force a public auction sale. At auction, guess who has the most money to bid? The developers. They'll buy the property for pennies on the dollar, and all heirs get their fractional share of that auction price, which is usually far below market value. "How long do we have?" Deacon asked. "The hearing is in 6 weeks. Grandpa, I know you don't want to hear this, but we should consider settling. Take their offer before the court forces a sale for less." Deacon stood up, his chair scraping the floor. "No, there has to be a way." "There isn't. I've researched this. Legally, they're within their rights. Once they bought Robert's share, they became co-owners. The law lets any co-owner force a partition. Then we find a law they didn't think about." Deacon reached for his cane. "Get your laptop. We're going to the courthouse." "For what?" "To dig up weapons." The Fulton County Courthouse was a modern glass building, but its basement archives were anything but modern. Malik followed his grandfather down 2 flights of stairs into a room that smelled of old paper and must. Row after row of filing cabinets and storage boxes stretched into the shadows. "Grandpa, what are we looking for?" "History." Deacon moved slowly between the shelves, reading labels. "Your generation thinks everything's digital, but the oldest records, the ones that matter, they're still on paper." Historical research. Protection method. Number 1. Many seniors don't realize that local courthouses, historical societies, and land registry offices contain documents that could protect their property. Original deeds, historical designations, easements, boundary surveys, and in some cases, especially for African American property, documents related to Reconstruction-era land grants can provide unexpected legal protection. They searched for 3 hours. Deacon's fingers traced through deed records, sale documents, property surveys going back to the 1800s. Malik was about to suggest giving up when his grandfather made a sound. Not quite a gasp, more like recognition. "Found something?" Malik asked. Deacon carefully pulled out a brittle yellow document protected in a plastic sleeve. The paper was aged to the color of weak tea, with elegant handwritten script in faded brown ink. At the top, an official seal. "Special Field Order Number 15, Deacon read slowly. Issued January 16, 1865. General William T. Sherman. The islands from Charleston south, the abandoned rice fields along the rivers for 30 miles back from the sea, and the country bordering the St. Johns River, Florida, are reserved and set apart for the settlement of the Negroes, now made free by the acts of war and the proclamation of the President of the United States." "The 40 acres and a mule order," Malik whispered. "But Grandpa, those grants were reversed. President Andrew Johnson gave the land back to former Confederate owners." "Most of them were reversed, but not all." Deacon turned the document over carefully. On the back, in different handwriting, was a property description and a name. Jeremiah Jones, freedman, parcel 184, Old Fourth Ward Township, Atlanta District. Malik's eyes widened. "This is your great-great-grandfather's original land grant? And it was never officially reversed because Jeremiah purchased the land a second time in 1866 with wages he'd saved, creating a dual claim, both a grant and a purchase. The deeds recorded in both registries. That's incredibly rare. But Grandpa, I still don't see how this helps us. The current partition law doesn't care about historical ownership." Deacon smiled, the first time Malik had seen him smile in weeks. "It doesn't. But there's something else. I need you to make a phone call tomorrow to the Georgia Historical Preservation Society, and I need you to order something called ground-penetrating radar. Why? Because every Sunday for 60 years, my father brought me to the big oak tree in the backyard and told me to remember, under this tree, our people rest." I always thought he meant metaphorically. What if he didn't? The next week brought 2 developments that ratcheted up the pressure to unbearable levels. First, the city building inspector showed up with a clipboard and a bad attitude, finding suddenly that Deacon's house had structural concerns and potential electrical hazards that would require expensive repairs or possible condemnation. The timing was suspiciously convenient. Second, Titan Development's lawyer hand-delivered an updated offer. Final notice, $1.5 million, take it or leave it. The partition sale will get you less than $200,000 for your share. They were squeezing from every direction. Malik, who had moved into the farmhouse to help his grandfather, was documenting everything with his phone. Timestamps of the early morning construction noise, videos of the deliberate dust raising by trucks, recordings of drone flights over the house. Harassment, documentation, protection method. Number 2, if developers or neighbors are engaging in harassment to pressure you to sell, keep a detailed daily log with dates, times, and descriptions. Take photos and videos of every incident. Record noise levels with smartphone apps. They're admissible as evidence. Save all correspondence, texts, emails, letters. File formal complaints with police. Even if they don't act, you create a paper trail. Document health impacts, sleep loss, stress, medical visits. This evidence becomes crucial for filing harassment claims or requesting restraining orders. But the pressure was taking its toll on Deacon's health. His doctor warned his blood pressure was dangerously high. At night, lying in the dark, listening to distant construction noise, Deacon sometimes wondered if he was being selfish. Maybe Malik was right. Maybe he should take what he could get and spend his final years in peace. Then he'd remember his father's voice. "This ground is holy, Zeke. Don't ever forget that." 3 weeks before the partition hearing, a white van arrived with GPR Solutions, ground-penetrating radar services, painted on the side. 2 technicians spent 6 hours moving equipment across Deacon's backyard, especially around the massive oak tree that had been there longer than anyone could remember. The lead technician, a young woman named Dr. Sarah Mitchell, showed Malik her laptop screen filled with color-coded radar images. "Mr. Jones," she called out to Deacon on the porch, "you need to see this." What she showed them made Deacon's hands shake. Beneath the ground, in a rough circle around the oak tree, were 12 distinct anomalies, shapes that showed up as voids in the earth. Regular, rectangular, approximately 6 feet long. "These are consistent with coffins or burial sites," Dr. Mitchell explained. "Old ones, probably mid-1800s based on depth and positioning. No caskets, likely wooden boxes or cloth wrappings that decomposed, but the graves themselves are clear." Malik grabbed his grandfather's shoulder. "Grandpa, you were right." Deacon's voice was barely a whisper. "My ancestors, they're really here." Cemetery laws. Protection method. Number 3. Federal and state cemetery protection laws are powerful tools. If burial sites are discovered on your property, human remains and burial sites have legal protection under cemetery laws. You cannot develop, disturb, or commercially use land designated as a cemetery. Historical cemeteries, especially those connected to slavery or early African American communities, often qualify for additional historical preservation protection. Moving graves requires extensive legal process, family notifications, and is nearly impossible for historical sites. Properties with cemeteries often create buffer zones where no construction can occur. That afternoon, Malik filed an emergency motion with the court and simultaneous applications with the Georgia Historical Preservation Division and the National Register of Historic Places. The documents included Dr. Mitchell's radar report, the original Sherman land grant, historical records of the property, and affidavits from Deacon and elderly church members who remembered their parents and grandparents speaking of the burial ground. Devin Sterling appeared at the property 2 days later, but his smooth confidence had been replaced by barely controlled fury. "You think you're clever?" he snarled at Deacon. "Filing all these historical claims? It won't work. We've got lawyers who'll tear this apart." "Maybe," Deacon said calmly, "but you'll have to do it in the sunshine." I called the Atlanta Journal-Constitution yesterday. They're running a story tomorrow. Development company seeks to build over enslaved ancestors. Burial ground. "How do you think that'll play, Mr. Sterling?" Sterling's face went pale. In the age of social media, this was a public relations nightmare. Images of bulldozers disturbing slave graves would go viral. Titan Development's other projects would face protests. Investors would panic. "You're bluffing." "Try me." The legal battle that followed over the next 3 weeks was brutal. Titan Development brought in expert lawyers who argued that the graves weren't proven, that the radar could be wrong, that historical protection didn't apply to partition actions between co-owners. But something shifted in those weeks. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution story did run, and it went national. Civil rights organizations showed up. The local community, which had felt powerless against gentrification, suddenly had a symbol to rally around. On the day of the final hearing, over 200 people gathered outside the courthouse holding signs. Protect sacred ground and honor our ancestors. Inside the courtroom, Judge Margaret Henderson reviewed the evidence. Dr. Mitchell's detailed GPR report, statements from historians, the original land grant documents, photographs of the site, and affidavits from the community. Titan Development's lawyer made his argument. Your Honor, while we respect historical concerns, the partition law is clear. Any co-owner has the right to force a sale. Historical designation doesn't override property rights. Judge Henderson turned to Malik, who stood to present their counter-argument. Your Honor, we're not asking you to override the partition statute. We're asking you to recognize that this property cannot be partitioned because it cannot be developed. Under Georgia Code, Section 44.3.105, cemeteries cannot be subject to partition sales. The ground-penetrating radar evidence, combined with historical testimony and documentary evidence, establishes that this property contains a cemetery protected under state and federal law. Even if that's true, the opposing lawyer interjected, cemetery status doesn't stop partition. It just limits what can be done with the land. Actually, Malik continued, under the National Historic Preservation Act and the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which courts have extended to African American burial sites, disturbance of historic graves requires extensive federal review. More importantly, Your Honor, we filed for and this morning received preliminary approval for this site to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places as part of the Reconstruction-era African American Settlement Heritage Trail. He presented the letter, official on federal stationery. This designation means that any development or land disturbance requires federal environmental impact review under Section 106 of the Preservation Act. It also means that Titan Development's planned 40-story tower cannot be built because federal aviation regulations prohibit structures over 12 stories within a quarter-mile of historically protected sites without FAA approval, which typically takes 3 to 5 years and is rarely granted. The courtroom went silent. In other words, Judge Henderson said slowly, even if this property were partitioned and sold, it could not be developed for Mr. Sterling's purposes. Correct, Your Honor, which means the partition sale would be meaningless. The property has no commercial development value. Its only value is as a historical site and family homestead. Sterling's lawyer was frantically flipping through documents, realizing too late that they'd been outmaneuvered. Judge Henderson took off her reading glasses. Mr. Sterling, it seems your company bought into a property that cannot serve your purposes. Mr. Jones, you've presented compelling evidence that this land is indeed a historical burial site with multiple layers of protection. I'm denying the partition claim. If Titan Development wishes to be a 1/16th owner of a protected historical cemetery, that's their right, but they cannot force its sale. The gavel fell. Outside the courthouse, Deacon stood surrounded by supporters, reporters, and cameras. He was exhausted, his hands trembling from stress and medication, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there in months. Vindication. A reporter asked, Mr. Jones, how does it feel to win? This isn't about winning, Deacon said quietly. It's about remembering those folks buried in my yard. They lived and died as slaves. They never got to own the land they worked. My great-great-grandfather got 40 acres and a mule from General Sherman, then had to buy it a second time to make sure nobody could take it. Now, 5 generations later, people tried to take it again. But this time, he paused, collecting his thoughts. This time, the land itself protected us. Because we protected it. That's all I wanted, to honor them by staying. But the story wasn't quite over. 2 weeks later, Malik sat with his grandfather at the kitchen table with a different set of documents. Okay, Grandpa, we won the battle, but we need to win the war. Right now, this property is still technically a heir property split between family members. That's what let tighten in. We need to fix that permanently. Trust and estate planning protection method. 4. The most powerful tool to protect generational property is establishing a family trust or land trust. A trust takes the property out of individual names and places it under the trust's ownership. This prevents future partition lawsuits because the trust, not individuals, owns the property. Trustees manage the land for the benefit of all family members. The property cannot be seized for individual family members' debts. Succession planning ensures the land stays in family control for generations. Work with an attorney specializing in estate planning and heir property. Over the next month, Malik worked with a lawyer who specialized in heir property issues. They contacted every living heir of the original property, got their signatures, and established the Jeremiah Jones Family Legacy Trust. The trust's sole asset was the 2 acres, and its stated mission was to preserve the property as a historical site, honoring the family's ancestors. Deacon was named the primary trustee for life, with Malik as successor. The terms explicitly prohibited sale of the property or its development beyond historically appropriate maintenance. When Titan Development realized they now owned 1/16 of a share in a non-profit family trust that could never be developed or sold, they tried one last time to negotiate their way out. Sterling, significantly humbled, came back with a final offer. Mr. Jones, we'll donate our share back to your trust if you'll provide us an easement for utilities to serve our tower. Deacon considered it. The utility easement wouldn't disturb the graves and would actually help bring updated water and power lines to his property. Agreed. But one more condition. What? Your company funds the restoration and maintenance of this burial ground as a public memorial. Not a huge amount, $20,000 a year for 10 years. You get your easement, good publicity for honoring heritage instead of destroying it, and I get to make sure my ancestors' resting place is properly marked and maintained. Sterling, seeing a way to turn a public relations nightmare into a redemption story, agreed. 6 months later, on a warm Sunday afternoon in December 2024, the Jeremiah Jones Memorial Cemetery was officially dedicated. A local stonemason had carved simple but dignified markers for the 12 graves, with a central monument that read, "Here rest freedmen and women who survived slavery's chains to claim this land as their own. Their descendants honor their memory by refusing to let that land be chained again." 1860s forever. The ceremony drew hundreds of people, historians, civil rights activists, community members, and representatives from Titan Development who were working very hard to change their image. News cameras broadcast the dedication across Georgia. Deacon stood beneath the old oak tree, his hand resting on its trunk. Malik stood beside him, wearing the suit he'd wear to his law school graduation the following spring. You did it, Grandpa, Malik said quietly. We did it, Deacon corrected. But this fight's never really over. Every generation has to defend what the last one built. That's the burden and the blessing. Speaking of which, Malik said, I got a job offer. There's a nonprofit that handles heir property cases for black families across the South. They want me to join after graduation. Deacon smiled. You're going to take it. Yeah. Someone needs to teach other families how to fight back. You showed me it's possible. As the sun set that evening, casting long shadows across the farmhouse and the now protected burial ground, Deacon sat on his porch with his coffee. The glass towers around him still loomed. Their shadows still fell across his land. But they felt different now. Not like a trap closing, but like sentinels guarding something precious. He thought about his father, who told him this ground was holy. He thought about Jeremiah, his great-great-grandfather, who'd worked this soil first as a slave, then as a freedman. He thought about Ruth, his wife, whose flower beds still bloomed every spring. And he thought about the day Devin Sterling had first arrived with his briefcase full of money and promises, asking what was in the soil. Blood, he whispered to himself in the gathering darkness. But also roots, and roots don't sell. Essential lessons for property protection. 1. Understand your property risks. Get your property formally surveyed and titled if it's passed through generations. Know all the heirs and their contact information. One disgruntled relative can jeopardize the entire family's land. Partition lawsuits are the most common way developers steal heir property. 2. Establish legal protections before crisis. Create a family trust or LLC to hold the property. Update wills and estate plans regularly. Consider life estates. Elderly owner retains right to property for life, with clear succession. Formalize agreements among heirs before disputes arise. 3. Document harassment and pressure tactics. Keep detailed logs of all interactions with developers, record noise violations, privacy invasions, threatening statements. Take photos and videos constantly. File formal complaints to create legal paper trail. This evidence is crucial for harassment claims and restraining orders. 4. Research your property's history. Visit courthouse archives, historical societies, land registry offices. Look for original deeds, land grants, especially Reconstruction era, easements. Historical significance can provide unexpected legal protection. Cemetery discoveries change everything under state and federal law. 5. Know cemetery and burial protection laws. If graves exist on your property, they're protected by multiple layers of law. Ground-penetrating radar can detect burial sites non-invasively. Historical cemeteries, especially African American sites from slavery, Reconstruction, have federal protection. Development near cemeteries requires extensive review and is often impossible. 6. Use historical preservation strategically. National Register of Historic Places. Listing provides protection. State heritage designations create development restrictions. African American historical sites have specific protections under federal law. Historical status can affect zoning, building codes, and development rights. 7. Build community and media support. Don't fight alone. Developers count on isolation. Contact civil rights organizations, historical societies, community groups, media. Coverage changes the calculation for developers. Public support creates political pressure that legal arguments alone cannot. 8. Understand the true value. Developers will offer triple market value. It's still not enough. Generational land has value beyond money. Family legacy, historical significance, community roots. Calculate the real cost. Where will you go? What can you actually buy? What do you lose forever? What not to do. Critical mistakes. 1. Don't wait. Don't wait until developers knock on your door to secure your property. Don't wait until relatives start fighting to establish clear ownership. Don't wait until harassment starts to document your property status. 2. Don't go it alone. Don't try to handle partition lawsuits without an attorney. Don't assume you can't afford legal help. Many organizations help with heir property cases. Don't ignore the expertise of historians, surveyors, and specialists. 3. Don't trust developer promises. Don't believe this is our final offer. There's always another offer. Don't trust we'll take care of you. Get everything in writing. Don't fall for everyone else sold. Your situation is unique. 4. Don't sign without reading. Don't sign any documents from developers without attorney review. Don't accept cash offers that require immediate decision. Don't agree to preliminary agreements or right of first refusal clauses. 5. Don't ignore warning signs. Don't dismiss harassment as coincidence. Don't ignore building inspector visits that seem motivated by developers. Don't assume pressure tactics are legal just because authorities allow them. 6. Don't lose documentation. Don't throw away old family papers. They might contain crucial legal information. Don't ignore boring documents, property abstracts, old deeds. Surveys matter. Don't assume everything is digitized. Paper records often contain information. Digital ones don't. 7. Don't underestimate your power. Don't assume developers have unlimited resources. Bad publicity costs them millions. Don't think one person can't fight. Deacon Jones proved otherwise. Don't believe the law favors them. The law has protections you can use. 8. Don't neglect your health. Don't let stress go unmanaged. It undermines your ability to fight. Don't face this alone. Seek support from family, friends, community. Don't sacrifice your well-being, but remember what you're fighting for. Deacon Jones didn't just save his farmhouse. He created a blueprint for how vulnerable families can protect generational property from corporate predators. His victory came from combining history, law, community, and unwavering principle. The green dot on Atlanta's map isn't just 2 acres. It's a reminder that some things cannot be bought. Some ground is too sacred to surrender, and some roots go too deep to be torn up for profit.